Melanie Littlejohn, Shaun, Yves Knows, and Rick Thigpen. So before we start, we're just going to do a quick round robin. So we're going to start with Melanie. Melanie, can you just introduce yourself with your company and your title?
Sure. Melanie Littlejohn, Vice President of Customer and Community Engagement for National Grid's New York State territory.
Thank you. Shaun?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. Shaun Hoyte. I'm a section manager within the Energy Efficiency and Demand Management Department at Edison in New York City.
Yves?
Good morning, everyone. Yves Noel with the New York Power Authority. I'm SVP of Strategy and Corporate Development. Pleasure to be here.
And Rick, last but not least.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Thigpen. I am the Senior Vice President for Corporate Citizenship for Public Service Enterprise Group, and I'm also a National Board Member for AABE.
Thank you. Thank you all. So for all that's listening, today's session, the state of energy in New York, we're going to be talking about, the many changes that they've had with leadership and legislation, both city and state levels, how the changes influence the energy industry, and our policies and infrastructure surrounding the energy changing significantly. And how's that relating to our fields, and how does that affect us? So I'm going to do the questions, and we're going to start in the same order that we introduced ourselves in. So we're just going to jump right in. Question 1, how will these changes in leadership come to life, and what does it look like? That's a 2-part question for you, Melanie. It's a few more parts in it, but I figured I wouldn't give you all parts at the same time. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Karen, I could jump in while Melanie
Perfect. Thank you.
Fixes her audio. So just to get started, Edison, we're the electric, gas, and steam utility that serves the 10 million customers, residents that live in Westchester County and the 5 boroughs of New York City. We're regulated by the Public Service Commission, right? And we are optimistic about our clean energy future. As the prior administration, we didn't have much support in this space, but I'm mostly excited about the direction that we're going from a political landscape. I know we have a lot of new leaders in place right now. Most recently, the DOE announced an overhaul of the infrastructure leadership, primarily to focus on how they're going to spend proactively the $62 billion budget that was allocated by the infrastructure bill, which is going to be a direct benefit to our clean energy transition and equitable jobs that are going to be created. At the state level in New York, we have a Governor Hochul that just released the 2022 State of the State plan, and really released plans for making New York State the offshore wind hub, investing $500 million in offshore wind, and additionally laying down the framework for 2 million climate-friendly electrified or electric-ready homes by 2030. These plans are very ambitious, right? But we know that in order to decarbonize our footprint, that we're gonna have to be successful in a variety of ways, and having that level of leadership and engagement from the federal and from the state level is very, very much what we need to be successful. At the city level, we have a new incoming mayor, Mayor Eric Adams. I had the pleasure of meeting him for the first time when I was working on what we call the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program. We were running a residential energy efficiency program where we were helping residents become more energy efficient by installing LED light bulbs. Now, LED light bulbs is a very simple measure to install. We call it low-hanging fruit. And at the time, Mayor Adams, he was the Brooklyn Borough president at the time, showed up for a press release and a video shoot to really meet the customers and really explain the importance of these programs within the community. right? I suspect that there'll be a lot more of that sort of focus moving forward as he takes on a larger role within the leadership of New York City and New York State. But just having that from the top-down approach really helps us really design our programs to make sure that our communities are equitable, to make sure that we're creating green jobs, and make sure that we're spending all of our capital and our funding in the right manner. Part of my role in the Energy Efficiency Department is to facilitate and manage some of these incentive programs. As of late, I was the program manager for the small to medium business space. And you can imagine, that's the heartbeat, that's the foundation of New York City's economy. You have barbershops, bodegas, brick and mortar stores, supermarkets, restaurants, and they each have different needs. For example, a manufacturing plant is really focused on making sure that their systems are on. Their data centers are, make sure that they have backup power, that is resilient, and that there are no outages. Meanwhile, restaurants are really worried about their bottom line. Retailers are worried about aesthetics. So it's really about meeting the customers where they are. These business owners, residents really need to have a fundamental understanding, and that's where we feel like the utility programs and leadership, again, from the top down and bottom up approaches, really help educate them and make the right decisions for a clean and equitable energy transition.
Thank you. Yves, do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Shaun gave a great sort of overview from a micro and micro perspective. So like, I'll take a step back and look at it from a different angle, right? Like from a macro's perspective, we know that the world, the United States, New York as a state, and New York as a city are on a decarbonization journey. We know that we're looking for any means by which we can take carbon out of or to limit the emissions of greenhouse gases. And I think that thread and that theme is going to sort of march forward from now with this administration and into the future. The question for us is, how do we either, whether it's going to be an accelerated trip down that path, or like a sort of or a slower trip down that path, right? And I think that what we're seeing now is based on the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act law that New York State, and by definition, New York City included, is going to be trying to have a very ambitious agenda around marching us down that path. And I think that you see that very specifically in the electricity section by, with our 70% renewable by 2030, moving all the way to 100% by 2040. You see that in investment in technologies. I think Shaun provided really good examples on the energy efficiency front and and how we are looking to sort of reduce it in buildings, but you also see it in specific technologies like offshore wind. What are we saying? 90 gigawatts in offshore wind, storage, and also distributed solar. So I think that just to reiterate, we're on a decarbonization journey. We're looking like New York State is going to be accelerated on that journey, and we're going to continue by investing in our electricity grid and also our specific technologies.
Thank you. So, Rick, can you give us the next 1 to 3 years part of that question? What do you think that New Yorkers, New York State businesses, residents can expect?
Yes, I can give it a shot anyway, and I can try to build on the two answers of Shaun and Yves as best I can. So first off, to look forward, we need to look back a little. From Governor Patterson and his Executive Order 24 setting greenhouse gas targets to, as you talk about, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act passed by Governor Cuomo, but now followed by Governor Hochul. Those three governors are Democrats, and that path forward has been consistent among the three of them. But New York has a gubernatorial election in 2022, and so the future will depend upon what the voters decide in terms of what direction we're heading in. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, there is a difference in how we approach these issues depending on which party we're loyal to. And the Republican Party will have a different approach than the Democratic Party has had. It's encouraging from my perspective that Governors Patterson, Cuomo, and now Hochul have stayed true to the cause of climate change and are continuing to focus on taking steps to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. and also to take policy steps to build the resiliency of New York in order to handle the cousin of climate change, the increasingly severe weather events that we're all experiencing. I know we're going to talk about that a little more, but it's entirely appropriate to recognize that a key part of this policy is in response to what Mother Nature is talking to us about, and to protect our citizens from incredible amounts of water, from air pollution and the respiratory diseases that come with that, is also a part of this challenge as well. So I will be scared to predict the future because the voters have to speak first in New York before we know what the future is. Right. But it is very clear that the recent past has indicated that New Yorkers understand that climate change is a clear and present danger, that New York City must take steps to respond to the threats of climate change if it's going to do its responsibility to protect the safety of its citizens. And that, as we talked about, I'll also add, clean and equitable future is not anything that any of us should take for granted. There's an enormous amount of political resistance to equity. There's an enormous amount of political resistance to paying the cost of making things clean, and that many people are prepared for our children and grandchildren to pay the cost so that our lifestyles don't have to change today. We have a responsibility to try to educate people and bring them along. We have a responsibility to tell people that, you know, these changes won't mean the end of our quality of life as we know it, and that these things are both our responsibility to ourselves and our responsibility to the future. And that's a very daunting challenge for businesses to really step forward and talk like that. We are the ones who have the most information about climate change. We're the ones who have the expertise that people can come to rely upon if they're willing to listen. So looking forward to me means, for those of us in the energy industry, continuing to prepare for the increasingly severe weather events so that reliability is sustained, doing what Shaun talked about, continuing to accelerate efforts to have energy efficiency take hold. You know, all of us as Americans are energy hogs. We use far too much energy to protect our planet, considering the environmental impact of electric generation. And so we've got to change. And then we have to continue to protect our distribution systems, both electric and gas, from the increasingly severe weather. I know we're going to talk about it, but I'll just bring up Hurricane Ida and the devastating impacts that it had. And if we are not prepared for what's coming, we are not going to be able to deliver our energy in a reliable fashion, which is undermining our business models kind of across the region.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. So Melanie, can we hear you? Let's just do, you know, technology is technology. Just want to make sure I can hear you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes,
we can.
Thank you. So, well, see, it works. It works. So, Melanie, I'm going to ask you a similar question. The gentleman have pretty much spoke about in depth. But for you, can you just tell us, how do you think the changes in leadership comes to life, and what does it look like over the next 1 to 3 years?
So the changes in leadership, and what will it look like over the next 1 to 3 years from an energy landscape? I think what will be critically important over the next 3 years from not only a leadership perspective, is understanding what we need to do to ensure that all customers, all communities have an opportunity to participate in the evolution of the clean energy, of clean energy. And that has to be topping the agenda and leading the agenda in a very pronounced way, and understanding what will we need to do as an industry, from a legislative perspective, from an incentive perspective, to really drive and move to the clean energy landscape, and how will we manage the cost as well associated with that transition, to ensure that none of our customers are unfairly burdened by that transition. So it's a tall order. It's a tall order.
So Rick actually walked us into the next part of the question, which is the climate changes that we are facing. You know, they're enormous right now. The policies, the leaderships, all critical, but still one component of the pathway forward. What innovations or transformations do we see coming out of industries that will be a game changer, that supports the policy, the innovation that are happening right now, or will be happening in the near future? And Rick, I'm not picking on you, but you did walk us into that, so I'm gonna kind of call on you first for that one.
All right. So I'll start. I'm not sure I'm the technology guru, but certainly there's a lot of public policy components to this. So I'll start again with the past, and I will distinguish two events: Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Ida. Superstorm Sandy came in and drove water up the coast and flooded bays and coastal areas. Hurricane Ida dropped tremendous amounts of rain and flooded in a disastrous way neighborhoods in different places. Two different events. So how you prepare for the future depends on what you're preparing for, is my point. And trying to predict what happens tomorrow, we always use yesterday as a good model. As we've talked about with the scientists, the key policy element for climate change is to decarbonize the economy. That hinges on decarbonizing electric generation in order for that to happen. So the first innovation we'll talk about is offshore wind. I believe the continued preservation and perhaps expansion of nuclear, using more solar, perhaps using hydropower. So generating electricity in a decarbonized fashion is absolutely important. And once again, back to Shaun, all of us using less electricity, consuming less energy on an individual basis is an important part of that package. It makes the burden higher, or I'm sorry, the burden lower of new generation. Then our electric distribution system has to be prepared for these new weather events. You know, so increasing use of smarter meters, of digital technology in the distribution system to identify outages, to reinforce the distribution system to withstand more and more of the weather events. All of this is going to be building on new technologies and new developments. So innovation in how we distribute the electricity, absolutely innovation on how we generate electricity. And then really a series of new technologies will come in when we talk about the broader decarbonization of the economy. The simplest one to talk about is the electrification of transportation, electric cars, and making sure that our buses are electrified going forward, and that the distribution system is reinforced to handle that increased load. So these are exciting challenges coming for all of us. And for those of us at AABE, I'll get personal for just a second. I know my career at public service in New Jersey is enhanced by the need for change in the energy industry. The status quo rarely had opportunity for people who happen to look like us. And we found ourselves sort of circumscribed in the opportunities we had. But the world of change is coming, and I'll strike that. The world of change is here, and change is going to open doors for people like ourselves. It's going to open doors for people who are prepared to walk through the door to make contributions in the future. These enormous changes are going to require changes in public policy. So things like environmental justice, taking the input of community stakeholders, paying attention to the challenges of affordability are all going to be important parts of running our businesses in the future. And we're going to have to make increasingly use of the increasingly diverse talent pool that's out there. And we all know in some places that's a struggle for some people to do, because ability and talent looks a certain way to too many Americans, and too many of those Americans' view of what talent looks like doesn't look like people like AABE members. So change is coming. Opportunities knocking for us. Being prepared for the future is something none of us should ignore. And as my mother used to tell me, necessity is the mother of invention. And this innovation we're talking about is going to come not because we want to, because we have no choice but to find better ways forward. So I want to inspire people to be excited about the future, that doors are going to be open that were never open for us before, and necessity is going to make it possible for people like us to have opportunities and careers that we never had before. And we have a big challenge, not just because of who we look like that we get opportunity, but the role we can play in making the world better for the future. And as I think it was Shaun said, more equitable. And if anybody doesn't think that's going to be a struggle, they need to have a separate meeting with me for us to talk about in a little greater detail.
Thank you, Rick. Shaun, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rick laid it out perfectly. All the examples and the really inspirational thoughts, and we're in an equally exciting time as it is daunting. I believe I had two very separate careers during the two storms that Rick described. During Hurricane Sandy, I was an electrician in the field, still working at Edison, but I was working more on the electrical maintenance, sort of in the union, working with my hands, making upgrades, responding to emergency events such as Hurricane Sandy. At the time, we had a lot of disruption. Our system isn't built for these types of extreme weather events. Our infrastructure is not built for these extreme weather events. And we had transformers that went out of commission. It was my job and my team's job to replace that transformer. We had to rip it out, put a new one back in, and then we had the company, Edison, we invested $1.2 billion in storm hardening. What we realized is, again, not being prepared, some of our efforts were reactive instead of being proactive. And I think now, as Ida hit, we're starting to see more and more of these types of weather events. With the storm hardening, we were able to protect our systems. But if you looked on social media, you'll see all the subways that were flooded and people were running for their lives. Right? It's very, very scary times that when you think that this is happening more and more on a regular basis. So something my company, we partnered with Columbia University, the Earth Institute at Lamont Doherty and ICF, and we created what's called a climate change vulnerability study, which really outlines, these different sort of climate-driven risks and how we can mitigate them. I think one key element that we all need to be proactive about is adaptability. It doesn't necessarily have to be a climate-driven storm or climate-related storm that is forcing us to make these changes. Just look at the last 2 years with the pandemic, right? We weren't ready for that either. One thing that we're providing to our customers through innovation and technology is technologies that clean particulate matter out of the air, such as needlepoint bipolar ionization or UVC lighting that sits within the handling unit of the HVAC system, so that the common area space, the indoor air quality, is cleaner for the residents, for the customers, for people that are visiting these facilities, right? These are not old technologies, but these are technologies, as Rick said, that are coming to light because of the need. Right. And I think that we need to do a better job of exploration to see exactly, if we could forecast or assume something may happen, let's be ready. Right. It's all about grid readiness and being prepared. And, I'm most excited about the AMI that Rick touched on as well. Historically, energy flows in one direction from generation to distribution, consumption, and then it's dead. And in our new generation, as we start to reinvent and reimagine the grid, there's two-way flow of electricity, right? And to prepare for that, we need complete visibility into the system, what's on our distribution lines, how can we repair outages quicker, how can we prepare for our customers to what's called net metering, to feed back to the grid with some sort of monetary compensation, right? And I think we're getting there, but we have to do so in a safe, and we're going to keep repeating this, a safe, reliable, and equitable manner. And I think that's something that is a work in progress. It's not a perfect science yet, but I think we're on the right path.
Thank
an
you.
optimist.
Yes. Yves, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, they always say sort of speak first, otherwise you'll nothing left for you to say. I think Rick and Shaun did an excellent job. They talked about a lot of the challenges on the generation side. We got to develop emissions-free generating technologies, right? Solar, wind, the proliferation of those technologies are important, and we still need more innovation from there. And then Shaun talked about the customer, right? Hey, at the end of the day, we're looking at different ways to electrify either their buildings and their transportation in order to cut down emissions. So, what does that lead me to talk about? I'll talk about transmission, and I think transmission is often it is the unsung hero of a lot of the discussion on decarbonization. I think when you think about our state and where are the pockets of wind and solar energy and where are the pockets of load, you got to get it from where it's generated to where it's going to be used, right? And how do you do that? Through transmission. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to need massive amounts of innovation within transmission. We're going to need to use our lines more effectively, right? We want to get as much power as we can possibly get through our existing lines and our existing right-of-ways. And at the same time, we're also going to need innovation in how we build these transmission lines. Like, for instance, there are we have access to new resources, solar and wind, and they're not in locations that they existed, that we had transmission lines to before. So now we've got to build lines from them to the city, or to the load centers. And then finally, I think that, we spent a fair amount of time talking about what we need to do in order to sort of cut back emissions. I think, Rick and Shaun talking about sort of the storms highlights a point that, like, right now we're all in the asset maintenance business to a certain extent. We put like steel in the ground and for our use. So we've got to think about how can we harden our infrastructure, so for the resiliency of the grid. So yeah, I think that's the areas of innovation that I would sort of highlight. Hopefully, yeah.
Thank you. Melanie, I know everyone gave a lot, but I know that you have something that you can add to this topic. I just know you do.
You talk about speaking last. Wow. Here's the one thing that I know we will need to do. The conversation really around clean energy has largely been in the space of electrification for all of the right and good reasons, right? From how do we electrify so many core sectors of our community. But one of the things that I know we are also looking at is the role of renewable gas and hydrogen, and how do we use assets that are designed today to move one type of fuel source, and what do we need to conceive and think about tomorrow in terms of the decarbonization of heat. And heat today, that's largely fueled by natural gas. How do we do it differently? And what will be the innovative ways in which we identify those sources? So today we know it's hydrogen and other types of renewable biogas, right? What are those new innovations, and how can we maximize and scale them to the point that they have the capability to be delivered across our systems easily? These are huge challenges, right? And to electrify everything, that's a time. That's from a time and technology. To decarbonize heat, same thing, time and technology. And this is where innovation will need to come into play. And, to end the way Rick began, it will also require the full engagement of people that are AABE members or our aspiring AABE members. How are we going to engage young people to begin to see energy as an option and their role in it? Because it will take the collective work of people.
Thank you. Thank you. So this question here, I'm going to leave it up to you guys who's going to go first, who wants to jump in. How can we ensure that people of color are not disproportionately impacted by these changes, having to bear the brunt of the cost increase and also participating equitably in new job opportunities? And I know you all touched on this a little bit. So who would like to go first on this question?
I'm happy to.
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
Wait. You sure? I'm happy to wait.
Yeah, please.
Well, that's how do we guarantee? So that's quite a meaningful challenge. I think I mentioned it before. Part of it starts with us to be prepared to meet the challenges of the future. For those of us to train ourselves, to gain education, to have specific ways to contribute to the effort. The need is enormous. There's also an enormous public policy challenge. We would all be fooling ourselves to not recognize that public policy has played a role in the exclusion that many of us have felt from the mainstream of our economic activity in the past. Public policy can also have a role to play in including us in that mainstream in the future. So our ability to do the basic things, vote, participate in the political process, and making sure our voice is heard is not to be underestimated. We in the regulated utility business are extremely responsive to public policy and the signals given from public policy makers. So I would start there on a political action. Voting is an essential part of making that happen, as well as our own personal preparation. Then there's the challenge of overcoming the obstacles of those who don't believe we deserve a role, or those who want to make our country great again in a fashion that does not include people that look like us, like we were excluded in the past. So we'd be foolish not to prepare ourselves for that struggle and not to recognize that it is a struggle, in fact, we are facing. Having said that, there is also enormous economic logic in, as our population as a factual matter diversifies, and as the non-white sector continues to grow, that our economy will suffer, our performance will suffer if we don't make the best use of that talent pool and put it to constructive use and contribute to our forward motion. That exclusion doesn't make sense for our economy. It's not wise public policy. It just rings true in the hearts and minds of far too many Americans. And that's a struggle we should not ignore, and a struggle we should be prepared to face head on. Because if we do not, our children will be faced with the same challenge. And I'm sure many of you have heard your parents say, I thought it was going to be different for you. And I'm so disappointed that it's not. So I think those things are a very important part of that. But having said that, I'll say it again. Necessity is the mother of invention. And our state and our country's economic growth depends on people like us having opportunity to contribute. The solutions of the future will include greater senses of equity. And not everybody has knowledge about equity. Not everybody wants to go to 125th Street and make sure people are participating and are given opportunity, or going to different neighborhoods in Queens and Brooklyn and making sure that those who've been left out in the past learn how to be included in the future. So those are very, very important parts of what we're talking about. But nobody should doubt that what's good for our economy is that widespread participation, that the way to find excellence is to tap the talents of everybody, that there is no restriction on where to find the smart people, where to get other smart people. And I can find from my own experience, those of us who have such intimate experience with exclusion in the past are frequently the ones smartest on how to devise inclusionary strategies in the future. So people should be proud of some of the burdens they've borne in the past and be assets in the future. And I think you should not ignore that. And I think we should all take the responsibility to recognize we all bemoaned exclusion in the past. So what are the policies that we need to adopt for the future so that the same thing doesn't happen to the people coming behind us? Those are really important challenges. And my utility is built on a very simple model, providing universal access. And universal access should be the mantra of all of us in the utility industry when it comes to opportunity. Universal access. It's what made my company strong. It's what made my entire state and the entire state of New York electrified. And it's what makes it most affordable. And it's what's going to make our future brighter. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Rick. Melanie, you were jumping in a little bit earlier. You want to add to that?
Again, misplaced timing coming after Rick. My luck today is just run out. The other thing that I would add, just the one other thing, all of us sit in organizations where our voice and influence matters. What we need to continue to do is to push the need and focus on workforce development in the organizations where we are. Bring voice to it, right? Because guess what? When you are up close and personal with the work, with your organizations, and understanding what the future will dictate and what the workforce may bear at this point, I think we utilize our voice and influence within the organizations where we sit to push the focus on workforce development and push the focus on workforce development in Black and Brown communities. And that is how we leverage and utilize our influence up close and personal by holding our own organizations accountable for the delivery of workforce development.
Thank you. Shaun, Yves, do you guys want to add?
Yeah, I mean, Rick spoke well about sort of the execution of political power, right? Melanie spoke really, really well about the execution of the power of our role and the power of our voice. And, you know, there's nothing more that I can add there. But I think that there is also sort of two things, right? There's also the power of our experiences, and it builds off of Rick. But like, there's a power in like what we've gone through and sharing what we've gone through with a broader, the broader world, right? And you can do that politically by voting. You can do that at your job by speaking up on issues, but you can actually do that with your friends and family and your peers. And I think that like let's not underestimate sort of like the power of information. And then the last point I'll make is like, let's also come to this situation with a mindset of curiosity. Right. I think that, right, like you really, like you can't, well, I found that for me, when I come to situations with a mindset of curiosity, I am able to look at problems in a different fashion. I'm able to understand, I'm able to break them down a little bit more and then actually see solutions to those problems that you wouldn't ordinarily jump out to you. It actually puts you in like a, you know, like you don't have to be a pessimist, you don't have to be an optimist, you just have to be a realist looking at the situation with a very curious mindset to learn what you can, to do what you want.
Yeah, I agree with all the panelists. And I'll take a shot at going last as well. Now, listen, the progression of the biggest existential threat to mankind is climate change, and its progression came from global warming, which many people didn't believe was real, to climate change, and now what scientists are calling climate disruption. And we all know that it hurts the people with limited incomes the most, right? So we're trying to shift away from that by really advocating for policy objectives that enable new technologies to come to market and that are inclusive of these disadvantaged communities that have historically been left behind, right? So that's from the political side. On the what we could do from our position, I'm in full agreement with Melanie. Their workforce development and training. In my position, I was able to collaborate with my implementation contractor, Will Then Energy Solutions, a nonprofit organization, Green City Force, to design what we call the Clean Energy Academy. And really what it is funded by NYPA, which is the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. They have what's called program opportunity notices that are listed, where they provide funding for a lot of trainings for these people looking to transition into the clean energy workspace. And I should note that when we're creating new jobs for these individuals, 50% of them must come from what they deem priority locations. That's environmental justice zones, that's disadvantaged communities, that's some low and moderate income participants, right? And it's important. We can only get so far with the infrastructure we currently have in place. Right? In order to be successful, we have to train a workforce that is able to really distinctively tell the difference between what's right and wrong, that can educate people that look like them within those communities where they're trusted, right? We need to increase awareness and leverage our partnership and awareness relationships with those nonprofit local community organizations that really have the trust of those communities, because being realistic, we have a bunch of utility leaders on this call. The last thing a customer wants to hear is that you pay us a bill and we're going to actually provide you incentives to upgrade technology that's going to reduce your bill that you're still going to pay us. There's a lot of disbelief there, right? So we need this workforce to really gain that level of trust that we need to be that trusted energy advisor for all of our customers so that we can make this transition as seamless as possible. So I think that education is a core element, and cross-sector collaboration through partnerships with these organizations that our communities believe and trust in.
Thank you. So this will be the last question before we take any questions from our audience. So thinking globally and acting locally, are there any notable examples of leadership and transformation happening on the local level in New York that can serve as an inspiration for all of us? Anyone can go first.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. I think that the new mayor Eric Adams, his decision to consolidate the multiple environmental agencies into one and create the new climate and environmental justice organization under that umbrella is something that we should take notice of. It's not just speaking to climate justice and this clean energy revolution. He's actually making that mark, right? No, like very, very quickly, right? That this is a focal point of his administration, right? And we look forward to seeing what comes out of that office. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my own corporation at Edison. We are fully committed to decarbonizing our footprint, whether it's our electric vehicle fleet, whether it's our systems. We're committed to making sure that we have clean, reliable energy to all of our facilities by 2030. And this leadership goes up the chain to my director, Greg Elcock, who was on one of the panels yesterday. Lenny Singh, my senior vice president that opened up for a panel yesterday as well. My VP, Vicky Kuo, President Matt Ketchke, and my CEO, Tim Coley, are all preaching that we're here committed for this clean energy commitment. And I think that locally, a lot of our residents don't really see the utility as that leader in this space. But we're here to implement change, right? Advocate for these policies and make sure that we lead by example. One other note that I felt was fascinating, if anyone's into sports, watching the Super Bowl the other day, I think they had 110 million viewers maybe. And most people that aren't into the game pay attention to the commercials, right? But there was an article that just came out with data points that showed that this recent campaign for the Super Bowl more than doubled the amount of climate change related advertisements that actually aired, with the majority of them coming from the electric vehicle sector, as we have all these new EVs that are coming online. But we're really just, what we're doing is we are vocalizing in different ways the need to make this transition, right? We're socializing it, we're making it cool, which a lot of people may not think that it is, right? And that change is coming from multiple industries, multiple market segments. And I'm happy to be part of a corporation that's leading the way as well here in New York City.
I think one of the, Shaun is right on just in terms of all of the elements that he covered. But another interesting level of inspiration that I've seen, absolutely with some of the work that's being done across the state, but specifically, Black Power is doing some amazing things right in Brooklyn. And I don't know, well, Brooklyn and I believe there's other projects going on in Staten Island, even with the deployment of heat pump technology and the integration of it. And then training 1,000 young people in the city to be engaged. So when that is the active, that's the level of being intentional and active in terms of bridging workforce and clean energy. You know, when I think about some of the work that we are doing, National Grid as a company, and some of the demonstration projects that are not only have been deployed from Buffalo, but even some of the from Buffalo, I call it from Buffalo to Brooklyn and all points in between. We have to figure out how to deploy more of these community-wide programs at one time. We need to continue to drive the startup and set up of these projects. When I think about the Fruit Belt Project, which is a community solar project in Buffalo, I would love to see that duplicated across the whole of the state. in different environmental justice or disadvantaged communities specifically and first, and to figure out how we begin to leverage those things and use workforce development again as that tool, to not only have projects in communities, but to create opportunity at the same time. And so Black Power is certainly a leader, as well as National Grid in other parts of our territory, where we're starting to figure out those ways that we can leverage and engage communities in a radically different way. And so it's exciting, scary, but exciting.
Thank you. Yves, you're going to jump in here?
Yeah, you know, when I heard the question, I had sort of a very contrarian answer, and that being sort of the Climate Action Council. And for those of you that don't know about the Climate Action Council, it's a 22-member committee that's preparing a scoping plan to achieve New York State's ambitious goal, being driven by the CLCPA. That was the law that sort of signed it. And I find that this is a venue, the 22 members have brought together a collection of people from all different walks of life, from all over, from different vantage points on this energy transition journey, and force them essentially to be in a room, a virtual room, and talk about the issues and challenges that are presented with this decarbonization journey. I think like everything that you would expect, when you're forcing not forcing, but when there is a dramatic shift within any organization or any state, it requires a lot of stakeholders being brought together and dialogue and to a certain extent, talking about the same thing over and over and over again to come to a conclusion. So I think that like, this is a sign of like, it's a notable example of leadership. I think it's also the fact that it's a public forum where like, you know, anyone and everyone can listen to this dialogue that's happening, become, educate themselves on like sort of the challenges and hear different vantage points, right? Like it's not just the utilities, it's not just the state, it's advocates, it's academics, it's a real collection of people with different perspectives talking about this issue, trying to come up with a solution. And ultimately it's gonna deliver a scoping plan. And obviously, like my fellow panelists, I would also be remiss if I didn't talk about all the great things that were happening at the New York Power Authority, from sort of providing hydropower for the state, you know, and also building transmission projects, and then finally sort of agreeing to decarbonize our natural gas plants 5 years ahead of schedule. So those are the two topics that I would bring up as sort of signs of leadership and transformation that's happening.
So Rick, that leaves us with you.
Okay. So I will start with two things. Yeah, our responsibility in New York is Long Island, in particular, you know, Suffolk and Nassau County. It's a little bit of the Rockaways, and across our wider footprint as well. So there are a couple of things I'll point out. One is the world of energy efficiency is a excellent way, as we assume more of those responsibilities, we're also paying attention to creating new job opportunities. That's one of the prime opportunities to bring in new entrants into the workforce and to pay attention to the diversity and to focus on the benefits for disadvantaged communities. And there's no better way to do energy efficiency in some communities than to have local people be trained to do the job. And so we're discovering that. We're discovering also, as we do our distribution projects and site transmission lines, that the dictates and concerns of environmental justice are increasingly seeping into our decision making, into our siting decisions, and that's also a sign of transformation from the past. Beginning to respect some of the voices that had been ignored in the past, and I'm very proud to see that happen. And then again, and then finally, it's working with our organized labor partners. We are a company that uses an organized labor workforce. Over 2/3 of our workers are members of collective bargaining units, and engaging in the dialogue with them to also embrace the future, to begin to purposefully create opportunities in the trades for people of color. So our company is beginning to use its buying power and paying attention to its stakeholders' voices. And I consider that transformational. To one, to create opportunity in communities that have been excluded in the past. Two, to work with the unions to create opportunities to also increase these supplier diversity in our, as we, purchase and procure goods. And we're discovering actually that to do that can bring enhanced strength to your regulatory applications. If you are being purposeful about expanding the realm of the economic opportunity, expanding the realm of who benefits from your filings, you frequently have support for your filings that we didn't find in the past. So I consider those all transformational steps that our company is involved in taking. And it's really still in the early stages of it because our buying power does give us opportunity. And it's pretty funny, but he who pays the piper does call the tune, including when it comes to a diversity in hiring.
Thank you. Thank you all for answering the discussion questions. We do have a question from an audience member. Their question is, what other state or local laws are needed or in planning to help push the industry? Anyone feel free to jump in for that one.
So I'll be happy to start as a public policy guy. Certainly environmental justice laws are very helpful to ensure that the voices of different stakeholders in different communities are heard. Very helpful. Supplier diversity laws are helpful to ensure that there's a sort of a public sector backing to being purposeful about buying locally. And for us, buying locally means access to a very diverse set of vendors, and being purposeful about increasing your supplier diversity in public policy, and being purposeful about increasing the access to opportunity. There's a lot of resistance to quotas, et cetera, but creating access to opportunity is one. So I think that's also important. So laws that encourage expansion of opportunity, laws that encourage supplier diversity, laws that encourage environmental justice that require some consultation, and laws that encourage the corporation to be purposeful about its own hiring and to make sure that its own workforce does represent some of the communities it serves. And some of that cannot be diversity words, but it can be buy local words or hire local words.
Thank you.
We could go on and on quickly.
Okay, thanks. Yves, I see you linked in, so it looks like you were, you really got something you want to say. So I'm guessing you're next.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I think, while the New York Power Authority, we're not an advocacy organization, and my organization, and I in particular, I'm a strategy guy, not a public policy person. So I won't comment on specific laws. What I'll say is that I see that there is a need for emissions-free generation. And I think that hydropower provides not only energy, not only capacity and energy, but it also provides ancillary service and can be, a water-powered battery for a lot of the renewable energy, the intermittent renewable energy around wind and solar that are coming into the market. So I'd say that there's a need for sort of the proper valuation of that.
Shaun and Melanie, before I go to the next question.
Yeah, I tuned into the Path to Net Zero panel yesterday, and there was a part of the segment where they were speaking about the carrot and the stick, right? So we're going to start with the carrot, which is what we have in New York State. We have what's called the New York State Clean Heat Program, where we're highly incentivizing heat pump technologies to electrify the heating load in the winter months, right? Those incentives are available to all of our customers that are within the Con Ed and other joint utility service territories here in New York State. That's within the residential sector, multifamily, large commercial, industrial, and then small to medium business. Now, the stick that is really going to drive some of this change is part of the Climate Mobilization Act, a local law, 97, which is going to highly penalize some of these building owners, well, 25,000 square feet and above, if they're not within the permissible carbon emission limits as benchmarked towards a comparable building stock, right? We think that these local laws are in place to ensure success of our decarbonization efforts. Now, at Edison, we are a summer peaking system, right? We have about 40% capacity to increase the electric load in the winter. And we feel like if we are able to successfully electrify the heating systems in the winter, pair it up with some building envelope and electrify domestic hot water, it'll really help us towards our decarbonization efforts on that path to net zero. So continuing to advocate for some of those laws in a way that you're doing so in a just manner, not just penalizing anyone that you see right in front of you without putting a plan in place or a process to help them achieve some of those decarbonization goals that we're looking to accomplish collectively. So I would say Local Law 97 is a big one that is in focus for New York City right now.
Yeah, and I think that one of the areas as well, areas of focus, really has to circle back to this problem is mammoth, right? It is mammoth. So I think, how do we ensure from a policy legislative perspective that everyone has an opportunity to participate? So whether it's even utility ownership of large renewable projects, how do we begin to ensure that every part of our economy is focused on trying to drive the change? And that's really going to create participation and participation of utilities as well in a different way.
Thank you. The next question: New York has a significant amount of aging infrastructure. How do we push building owners to embark on retrofitting their buildings for energy efficient in spite of the significant cost?
Passing laws to change building codes.
Yeah, that one's a little easy.
I'm sorry, Yves.
No, you're right.
It's actually really funny that we started with sort of the carrot and stick analogy, right? Because like that is literally like, and we talked about the carrot and we talked about the stick. I'd like to add in the other, like another often underused mechanism, which is information, right? Like providing building owners with sort of the any sort of insight into the dynamics of how they're using their buildings, and basically data analytics on their operations to improve efficiencies, improve the quality of living in those buildings. There's other mechanisms that we can use to, it's not a push, it's not a pull, but it's at least an inform building owners.
Okay, thank you. Next question: as we move toward electrification, what is being done to ensure resiliency, climate resilient and power grid resilient?
So that's a great question. I think from the New York Power Authority's vantage point, we're actually engaging in multiple climate adaptation studies, like really looking at sort of like given the changes that are occurring in weather patterns, what impact will that have on our existing infrastructure? And once we understand like the impact on our infrastructure, we'll then be able to have plans around how do we harden that infrastructure for these resilient, these 100-year storms that seem to be coming even more and more frequently.
Yeah, we have a similar approach at Edison. We just updated our electric and gas long-range plans. And we also have a group that analyzes load growth for our entire service territory every year for 5-year projections, 10-year projections, and 20-year projections. Right? It's called our area station planning group, and really looking at if there's going to be a constrained area, how do we prepare for it, whether it's on the customer side or whether it's on the utility side for a solution. They're called load relief plans. And part of the previous question and answer combined with this one is, our incentive programs are really designed to educate customers, right? And to kind of meet them where they are. So like the incentive structure is based on market segment. So the incentive that a large commercial industrial customer may get may not be the same as a smaller customer that doesn't have the upfront capital. What we really need to do is design our programs in, again, an equitable way that really makes the business case for them to make these changes and simplifies the solutions for them. An example would be, again, for the small business program, we have a participating contractor network of about 150 different organizations that specialize in lighting, HVAC, refrigeration, gas control upgrades, and HVAC-R, right? The customer may not have any sort of wherewithal on what to do next. They may not even know that they have an energy problem. We send these qualified participating contractors to that customer business to do what's called a free, no obligation energy assessment and really identify the baseline conditions within that facility, spit out and generate a report which will tell them what they could upgrade to, the total project cost, the amount that Edison would pay, that's the incentive dollar amount, and then the balance would be what the customer would owe directly to the contractor. Now that customer could choose to move forward with some, none, or all of the recommendations at no cost to them. That assessment is free. At the point in time that they decide they want to move forward with the project, we will send a participating contractor to make the installation for them, off-peak hours during a time that they feel most comfortable with, so that we're not interrupting the operations. And then at the end of that project, they're paying the contractor directly their cut, and we're paying the contractor. So that customer in that small to medium business space does not have to wait for a rebate because we know that they're strapped for cash, right? So we help make the program flow a little bit smoother. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, we increased our incentives for that particular program to hit about 85% of the total project costs, right? Hoping that the customers that were proactive and that could afford it will move forward with these projects, and then over time see a shift in the energy bill, and then they can reallocate some of those funds back into the business, back into the community, and be successful. One last example that I'll give you on a customer that did so before the pandemic is a yoga instructor. She had a yoga studio in Staten Island. We did all of her lighting for her, right? We did a couple of other measures within her facility, and within a year, she was able to save so much money that she was able to hire another yoga instructor for her business. So she ended up growing her business based off this energy efficiency project. And, you know, a lot of our customers don't think that this is possible. So it starts with education, working with our business improvement districts, our chambers of commerce, our borough presidents, just to make sure that the word is out there, community-based organizations. It's really up to us to really make sure that the funds that are allocated for these projects are getting distributed equally to the customer base that is actually contributing to them monthly on their bills, the utility bills, right? It's called a systems benefit charge, which has been transitioned to rates now. But all of us, even me, I'm a New York City customer, right? I live in Manhattan, and I take advantage of the programs because I know that they work.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Okay, so there are no more questions. So in 3 minutes or less from each one of the panelists, can you just summarize the state of energy in New York for us? I know that's not a lot of time, but you know, I'm quite confident that you guys can do that.
Well, I'll start by thanking AABE for doing this and for this panel. This is an excellent opportunity to educate AABE members and to get them more familiar with some of the challenges and some of the realities in the energy world. The state of the energy world in New York, I will say some of the direction will be dependent upon the outcome of the 2022 election, both for governor and who runs the majorities in the state legislature. But there has been an election for the mayor of New York City, and he's made it very clear that he plans to continue down the road of responding to the challenges of climate change. Opportunity is knocking for all of us, and the change is here. The status quo is slowly going away, and our job is to shape a new, cleaner, more affordable energy future that we have to struggle to ensure equity is a part of. And that opportunity is open to all of us, and we should be excited about the chance. And as I'll say one more time, necessity is the mother of invention. This is not a journey that somebody picked because they'd like to do it. We have no choice but to take it. And it's going to create opportunity for AABE members that we've never had in the past. And we have to respond to the challenge of climate change. The weather is going to demand it of us. So thanks everybody for being here, and thank you for having the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Rick. Melanie?
Agreed.
Sorry. She was leaning in.
No, go ahead, Yves.
Try not to be last again.
Shaun's going to be last.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you, everyone. So I think, you know, I'll end where I began. Like, the world is on a decarbonization journey. We are pulling out emissions out of our system and trying also not to sacrifice our quality of life. All aspects of our system, our energy system, our life are going to be impacted. We talk about generation, we talk about transmission, we talk about distribution and the customer side. All of it is going to be impacted. And not only, this is not just a situation in which engineers or craftsmen or the traditional members of sort of the people who, when we think of the energy world, are going to be impacted. I think back to like the changes in the business models that are going to occur in order to incentivize this change to happen. I think that what we will see is that people, like, you're going to need economists, you're going to need marketing people, you're going to need change management people, you're going to need people with soft skills in order to educate, influence, and drive this change in the industry. So so we see the wave, we see the trend. Decarbonization is coming, and there's a place for all of us. We just gotta be curious, try to learn as much as we possibly can about the current challenges, and figure out what our own personal skills are that we can use to address those challenges.
You know, thank you. Yeah, that is fantastic. You know, I again applaud Abe for keeping these conversations relevant and alive. Every time I have an opportunity to participate, I love sitting and meeting and engaging with my fellow panelists who are brilliant. So thank you. And moderator as well, thank you. You know, we are at the .com phase of the clean energy agenda. We are still very much at the beginning of this, right? So I want to encourage us as thought leaders in this space, talk about this at the dinner table. We're about to go, I don't know what holiday, whatever holiday activity in the family is going to be together, begin to talk about energy. Encourage young people specifically to begin to understand what this means for them and to help them translate what they care about into a meaningful way that they can engage from a workforce perspective. I think this moment in time is big, and we have to lean in ways that we never thought before. Not only do we show up at the polls and engage in the conversation, but let's know what the issues are, right? Begin to help educate our community on what the issues are, and be the voice to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of how resources are allocated to not only to communities, but to businesses. We are at that moment, and I encourage us to keep leaning in heavy with our voice to really help shape the future, because we're going to matter in driving economies and making communities better and stronger.
Thank you. So, Shaun, before you answer the question, someone wanted to know, where can they find out about the Con Ed initiatives? The incentive programs.
The incentive programs, you could go to coned.com/energy efficiency, and you'll see all of our incentive programs listed on the website.
Okay, thank you. And now, can you give us your 3 minutes or less?
Yeah, it's gonna be less. You know, I want to echo the my panelists' sentiments and just thank Abe for having us today. You know, we're all busy in our respective ways, but taking the time to make sure that we share this information. I mean, I'm inspired by what I've heard from the fellow panelists, right? Even though I'm a panelist as well, right? So Rick, Yves, Melanie, Karen, thank you so much for sitting alongside me to have this conversation. I think it's important that we are vocal, right? That we socialize exactly what's happening, right? And that we make ourselves available so that we're successful in this transition. And I'll just leave with this note that, you know, moving from what we call stakeholder engagement to stakeholder mobilization is more of an action, right? Instead of a conversation. The conversations need to happen, but there also needs to have action that comes out of those conversations. And when you think about cross-sector collaboration and partnerships, you have a diverse group of different insights, just as we have on this panel, right? Very diverse group of insights that we can learn from each other. And, you know, when you think about what that leads to, equity is going to lead to that transparency that we need to be successful. Then you have the transparency that builds and leads to that trust. And then the mutual trust that leads to that engagement that we need across all sectors, right? So with that, again, thank you for having me today, right? And I look forward to continuing the conversation with whoever wants to have it, because we need to continue to move forward.
So thank
Karen,
you,
do you
Melanie,
mind?
Sean, Rick, and Yves. Wait,
Well,
so we trying to say
I'd be
something?
remiss if I did not say this. NYPA
Okay.
is hiring. So
Oh,
please.
there you go. That is
There goes the plug.
Say it again, one more time.
NYPA is hiring. So please check out the NYPA.gov website. Look for, and multiple different roles, multiple different and skill sets are we're looking for. I think, you know, one of the things that we haven't touched on is like within the utility industry, it's sort of, we're experiencing two peaks right now. Young people and people getting ready to retire. So please come in, please be a part of the knowledge transfer. Please apply. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and sort of continue the conversation because it's going to be important. Let's step forward. Thank you. And thank you, Dave.
Thank you for that, Yves. I mean, we learned a lot from this session. There's so much more that we can do and grow on and upon. And I thank each one of the panelists for sharing their thoughts and knowledge for us as we close out this second day. Thank everyone for tuning in, and everyone have a good day.